It's interesting to be introduced as the Prime Minister. It's myself and those speaking in favour of the motion. Hopefully I won't ever become Prime Minister. It is a pleasure to be here, and I think debates such as these are a fantastic opportunity to debate Scotland's future. And whichever side of the argument you're on, I think that the independence debate has given us an opportunity to think about what kind of future Scotland has and what kind of country we would like Scotland to be in. And whichever way you decide to vote in your university referendum and in the real referendum in September, I would urge you to take the time to listen to both sides of the argument and find out the facts as best you can before you reach a decision. I'll leave the politics to the politicians and take you on a bit of a personal journey as to why I've reached the conclusion I've reached that Scotland should be an independent country. I started my career after university in television in London. I worked for GMTV in London for 2 years, and it was to my frustration that I couldn't find the opportunity I wanted to in Scotland, because at that point in time the Scottish media was on somewhat of a downturn, I would say. And in London I met some fantastic people, many people who had been to Scotland, mostly who hadn't, and many who treated Scotland as somewhat, to my frustration, as a bit of a comic notion, that place way up far north where oil's running out and haggises run the hills. But, you know, it was a fantastic experience, and following that I actually came back to Scotland to work in politics. I worked for the current First Minister, so I won't declare an interest at this stage, for the SNP briefly, and then for the First Minister in his constituency office in Inverurie and in Peterhead. I had the pleasure of working in both parliaments, in the Scottish Parliament and the Westminster Parliament, and saw two very different sides of politics, two very different parliaments. In particular, one of the main things I enjoyed was working on local issues. Something that I know my Bruce will be very familiar with was the Inverurie paper mill. And I had the opportunity then to work with politicians of all political persuasions, and the opportunity to see politicians coming together for a joint cause in their local constituency. And one of the things that strikes me about politicians in Scotland, in particular of the Unionist parties who are headquartered in London, is that a lot of the time I feel they're doing their job with their hand tied behind their back, in respect that policy is laid out and they have to defer to their headquarters in London. And I think one of the reasons that the SNP has become so popular since 2007 is because it is headquartered in Scotland and people see it as a party who stood up for Scotland. They may not have been nationalists, they may not have been pro-independence, but they felt that the politicians in that party have done the best job for Scotland. And I would argue that if Scotland becomes an independent nation, there is an opportunity for politicians of all political persuasions to develop their own brand of Scottish politics. Yes.
Isn't it true that with devolution you can do this already? And already in the Scottish Parliament we have several different policies, on free personal care to funding higher education, a whole range of policies which are different already, and also because of policies set by our parties in Scotland, not dictated to us by London.
That may well be the case, but at the end of the day, the vast majority of our legislation and policies are, for the Unionist parties, are set by Westminster. That things such as the invasion of Iraq, nuclear weapons, the bedroom tax.
Point of information?
Yes.
Who would set interest rates in independent Scotland?
Well, obviously that is something that will be decided post-independence, and the preference, as we all know, is to remain within the pound, certainly in the beginning. But the point being that if you're in an independent nation and you're sitting at the top table at whichever bank sets the interest rates, you have the power to influence. And at the moment, Scotland does not have the power that it could to set interest rates, to influence the powers that be south of the border. I think one thing that I would like to reflect on more recently, I've worked in oil and gas, and I think that, you know, there's been lots of facts flung around about oil and gas. There's been lots of quotes and arguments come from both sides, I would like to quote Lord Kinnock, who said that the actions of Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government led to a prodigious waste of oil revenues, and spoke of his regret that the previous Labour government had not adopted a Norway-style oil fund. David Cameron has himself said that supporters of independence will always be able to cite examples of small independent and thriving economies such as Finland, Switzerland and Norway. It would be wrong to suggest that Scotland could not be another such successful independent country.
With the legislative intervention?
Yes.
Would you also accept that as part of a larger country like the UK, we also happen to be the fastest growing economy in the entire Western world at this present time, and surely she could find it in her heart to greet this growth with the welcome it deserves, not just in this part of these islands, but right across them.
I take the lady's point and welcome it, but I would counter that by saying that Scotland has generated £1,700 more in tax per person than the UK as a whole in 2011-2012. And Scotland has generated more tax per head in the UK every year for the past 32 years. There is a sea change happening south of the border in England. UKIP are on the rise. People talk about uncertainty post-independence. We're in no more certain position as part of the United Kingdom as we are if we were independent. And I would argue that with the powers of independence, we're in the position to make our own decisions about financial policies, have the levers and the powers at the top tables in places like Europe, where we get to make decisions and influence the policies that are most important to Scotland. In terms of universities and education, because obviously I'm aware of my audience, the Institute of Fiscal Studies finds that the hike in student fees is only resulting in a minimal saving to the taxpayer compared to when fees in England were at £3,000 and nowhere near the 15% saving that was claimed by the Office of Budget Responsibility.